Hey guys, welcome to episode 3 of our series. If you haven't already had a listen to our episodes 1 and 2, please do. You will find these on youtube.com/CoRAY Voices or through the Headliners website. My name is Tori and today I will be your host. Here alongside me are my two good friends, Eve and Jenny.
Hi.
Hey guys.
Today we are joined by our special guest, Polly. We are going to be talking about how and when to seek help for our mental health and getting some great tips and ideas from Polly, which we can use to help maintain a positive mental health attitude, where to go to seek mental health services, and help to spread awareness that it's okay to ask for people for help. Polly, if you could please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and your background.
Thanks, Tori. So I'm Polly and I am a clinical psychologist by training. So I work clinically sometimes with young people, mainly teenagers with anxiety difficulties. But I'm also a researcher as well. So I'm based at both Oxford and Reading University, and a lot of my research focuses on understanding how we can help young people with mental health difficulties. And that's about understanding the kind of difficulties that they might have, but also trying to develop treatments in order to be able to help overcome those difficulties.
Thank you for that, Polly. That sounds like amazing work that you do. So if it's okay with Polly, we're going to go ahead and ask some questions about seeking help for your mental health, get some great tips, and share them with you guys. So Jenny, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, of course. When should our mental health and well-being be a priority?
Oh, I think mental health and well-being should always be a priority. Inevitably, there's always going to be challenges in life and difficult periods, and that's just part of being human. And, things like having exams, GCSEs, A levels, there'll be times when you fall out with your friends or have relationship difficulties. There's always going to be ups and downs. You're never going to be feeling great 100% of the time. But I think to have, a good quality of life, to be able to kind of achieve the kind of life that you want to have, then feeling okay, prioritizing that and having the skills to manage when you don't feel so okay so that you can bounce back. I think that's really important. So I think prioritizing your well-being has to be a really crucial part of that.
When is the right time for young people to ask for help with their mental health?
I think that it's probably about looking for patterns over time. Like I was saying, we all have bad days. So it's just about sort of seeing like how it adds up and whether actually it's a bit more persistent than just having the odd bad day. So I think if you find that you're having days and weeks where you're consistently struggling, or you're just missing out on things, you're not able to do things that perhaps your friends are doing, then I would really pay attention to that. So I'd think about all the different aspects of your life. So, at school or with your friends, or, things that you might do outside life, sort of leisure stuff, or your family life, and have a think about whether the difficulties that you're experiencing are getting in the way of you being able to do what you want to do in one or more of those areas. And if they are, I think then that's a kind of good time to think about getting some help. And often people do wait a really long time to seek help for understandable reasons. They worry about talking to someone and they feel that they should be able to manage on their own and they don't, they shouldn't have to ask for help. And we definitely meet people who might have waited years. Sometimes we'll meet adults who describe having had these problems for a really long time. And we really don't want people to miss out on opportunities. So I think I wouldn't delay. I think if you feel like you can't manage things on your own, then definitely seek help. And I think the other really important point to think about is that asking for help doesn't commit you to anything. So, the typical process if you ask for help is, first of all, maybe you start talking to a parent or your teacher or someone, and then maybe you decide, well, actually, I think I could do with a bit more support, and perhaps they then refer you to a service that might help support you. And then someone in that service might do an assessment with you and ask you some questions. And then maybe they put you on a waiting list for treatment. And actually, that might mean that the point at which you think, yes, I need some help, you might be, some time away from actually receiving that help. So I think don't wait till you've built things up and things hit crunch point and you're kind of in a kind of crisis period, seek help earlier on, because you can always change your mind and think, actually, maybe I don't need that referral after all. But what you don't want to do is sort of feel like you urgently need help now, and then the process takes that much longer.
Polly, how can young people ask for help with their feelings and emotions when they don't know exactly what they want help with?
Yeah, I think that's such a common experience, perhaps for all of us actually, is sometimes you have feelings or you might have emotions and you're not really quite sure what it's all about. You just feel stressed, or you have a sort of overall feeling you don't quite know what it relates to. So I think sometimes you just need to sort of talk things through with someone, just to try and start making sense of it all. Sometimes people prefer to do things like write it down, keep a bit of a journal or a diary. Um, but I think for a lot of people, just starting to get things off your chest can be really helpful. For example, in our clinic, often what we find is after we've done an assessment, people find a sense of relief, even though they've been talking about things that are really difficult. There's just, getting it off your chest can be really helpful. So I think the starting point is, don't feel like you need to know exactly what you want help with, but find someone you can trust and someone who you think will be willing to make the time and who genuinely cares. And that could be anyone. It could be a family member, could be a friend or a teacher or someone else, and try and talk to them about it when they've got some time to listen to you. And if you find that embarrassing and it feels all too difficult, sometimes it's helpful to sort of pick a moment where you're doing something else at the same time, like you're driving in the car or going for a walk or something. And I think if you're really struggling to make sense of it all, maybe keeping a note of when you're having these feelings can help. Maybe sort of just record like what was going on that day when I felt, yesterday when I felt really rubbish in the evening, what had happened that day, and just trying to note down as much as you can. Maybe thinking about like, how were you feeling? What were you thinking? So, for example, like if you were in a situation where you're chatting with your friends and you suddenly feel sick and shaky, it's about thinking, right, what were we talking about before I started to feel that way? And then maybe you suddenly remember, actually, I know what we were talking about. We were talking about the exams coming up, and other people were saying how much revision they'd already done, and I suddenly was thinking, oh my God, everyone's done so much work, more work than I have. And I'm really worried I'm going to fail and let everyone down. So I think sometimes just picking it apart, thinking about what was going on, can be really helpful, and kind of making a note of it. Um, and I wouldn't overly worry about what, or, whether you want help or not. It's just the first step is just starting to talk about it, starting to kind of make sense of it and have those conversations with other people, I think.
How can we help put how we feel into words when we are dealing with a lot of emotions?
Yeah, I think like I was saying, sort of trying to sort of just keep a lookout for, things that have gone through your mind, what thoughts you might have had, what else was going on. Sometimes talking to people can be really helpful, because, if you can talk to someone like a professional or, teacher, often they can be really good at helping you kind of make sense of those kind of feelings when you're dealing with emotions. And often, they might have worked with other young people that have got very similar difficulties. So they might have a really good idea of the kind of questions, as a starting point to ask. And sometimes they might use things like questionnaires, and that can be really helpful when you don't quite know how you feel, to kind of download a questionnaire and sort of, think about the different questions and whether they apply to you. That can also be a really helpful way of sort of thinking about it. But I would say, I don't think you need to arrive with like a perfectly formed understanding of what's going on. It's just about starting to initiate a conversation, really, and just finding a way to open that conversation up. So, it might just be starting by saying, I'm just having a really hard time. Can I talk to you about it? Or, I'm feeling really stressed. I could really do with a bit of advice. Or, I really want to talk to you about something. I don't even know how to say it. But it's just about just throwing yourself into the conversation. And then once you start going, sometimes that can help you sort of put some of those feelings into words, I think.
Why is asking for help a good thing?
Well, I think one of the first things about asking for help is it can make you realize that you are not alone. And, we know at the moment that around 1 in 6 people in the UK, young people in the UK, are experiencing mental health difficulties, and if you think about the average classroom, that's 5 people in the average class. So I think asking for help can help us feel that we're not going through something on our own, and that we're not alone. And, many of the young people that we work with, when they're experiencing difficulties, they can just feel really bad about themselves, and it can make them feel that somehow they're different or not good enough. And I think asking for help can really help you realize that actually that's not the case. There is nothing wrong with you. Having mental health difficulties doesn't mean anything bad. In fact, often people that experience sort of mental health difficulties are often the most lovely, caring, sensitive people, and that's almost part of the problem. So I think it can help you to realize that you have shared experiences that lots and lots of other people have too. But also, really importantly, asking for help can mean that you can access an evidence based treatment, because difficulties like anxiety and depression are treatable. So they're not something you have to learn to live with, they're something that you can have an evidence based treatment for. And one of the main treatment approaches that we use, because it has the greatest evidence base, is something called cognitive behavior therapy, or CBT. It's a bit of a mouthful, but essentially it's about changing how you feel, how you think, in order to deal with anxiety and or other difficulties. And so, for example, with anxiety, one of the main things that CBT involves is facing your fears rather than avoiding them. So many treatments actually can be really good, because not only do they help you with the difficulties that you're experiencing, but they can also give you some really good life skills that can just help you, going forward in your future generally, not just in periods where you're struggling. And sometimes, as much as we might want to deal with problems on our own, sometimes we just can't, and we do need somebody else's help. So, it can be really difficult without knowing, how treatments work and the kind of best approaches. And sometimes, anxiety and depression can really convince us that we need to do things that actually create a bit of a vicious cycle and make the problem worse. So having somebody who can help you, who's been trained to work with these kind of difficulties and knows what's the right thing to do, that can be really, really important in kind of getting that help that's really going to make a difference.
How can we as young people remove the stigma around asking for help?
I think it's about having open conversations with people. I mean, it's been so great in the last few years to see those conversations starting to take place in a kind of public space where, all sorts of people are contributing and talking about their experiences, because we know these experiences are common and they're nothing to be ashamed of. So I think it's about being able to have open conversations with people about how we're feeling and what we're experiencing, in order to kind of overcome and break down that barrier. Because we know there are many barriers to people being able to seek help for mental health difficulties, and the first is just actually understanding what you're experiencing, and then being able to share that with other people. So I think it's about having conversations, sharing materials, and just really encouraging people not to feel that it means that there's anything wrong with them. And in fact, by sharing them, it's an incredibly brave thing to do, and that's going to really help other people. So I think it's about being open and honest, and being able to show people that we're vulnerable, and that's actually a strength.
What can we do if people don't take our mental health seriously?
I think the number one thing is be really persistent. And I think, unfortunately, not everyone you might speak to might understand, or even might take it seriously. So, and when we've spoken to parents, teachers, or other people, the kind of people that you might speak to, or reach out to if you were experiencing difficulties, they've talked about some of the things that have got in the way of them being able to help young people. So parents have definitely talked about things like sometimes they don't quite know whether things are just normal teenage behavior. So whether feeling very emotional is just to be expected, or whether it means something else. And and sometimes for parents, their own feelings can get in the way. So if their child is experiencing difficulties, sometimes that makes them worry and feel guilty, and that can get in the way. Some teachers might be super supportive, but other teachers might not feel that helping their students is part of their job. So I think it's really important to recognize that if somebody doesn't handle things in the right way, that's nothing about you or your difficulties. It doesn't mean that your difficulties are not worthy of help. It just means something about that other person. So be persistent, maybe speak to somebody else that might be more receptive and might be more able to help you in those instances, and who can have the skills and the time to be able to take it seriously.
What if when the person we ask for help for our mental health doesn't know the answer?
Yeah, I think that's entirely possible, because often the people that you might start by talking to might be people like, family members or your friends. And so I think it's important to recognize that sometimes people won't know the answers. And in a way, the first thing you really want them to do is to listen to you. And secondly, you do, want them to do something, to take some action, assuming that's what you want. So they may well not be an expert in mental health, and they may well not have the answers. But I think that's not an excuse for them doing nothing. So I think if you speak to somebody and they don't know the answers, there are other people that they can speak to. So for example, if it was your a parent, then, they could speak to one of your teachers, they could speak to the GP, if it's a teacher, they could speak to other teachers at school, or the school nurse, or mental health professionals. So for example, many schools now have a mental health support team, and teachers can go and seek expert advice there. So I think if you have a conversation with somebody and they don't seem to know the answers, I think it's about making sure that at the end of the conversation, there's a clear understanding of what the next steps are going to be, and that, you're sort of saying to them, I'd really like you to find out what I could do here. Maybe it's about agreeing with them what they're going to go away and do, and who they're going to seek advice from to help you. And maybe it's about arranging another time to speak to them, to follow up on the conversation after they've got some more advice, so that there's an expectation that they are going to help, even if they don't know exactly what the answer is at this point in time.
What types of help are available for mental health?
Yeah, so there's a number of different services that provide mental health support for young people, and it can really vary from place to place depending on where you live. And some supports can be provided either within or via your school, so like the mental health support teams that I was just mentioning then. But other services can be provided outside your school. So, for example, if you were accessing NHS child and adolescent mental health services, or CAMS, that would be done independently of your school. And your teachers and your GP would be able to help you to access those local services.
What if young people don't like to talk face to face or over the telephone?
Yeah, so many of the services are provided face to face, although actually during the pandemic, many of those services had to switch how they deliver treatments. So many of them have used things like video conferencing software, so that you can have your session at home, but you're still speaking to a professional. So and some treatments can be delivered online using kind of online computerized programs, but it does vary from place to place. But I think, if you don't want to talk to someone face to face or over the phone, the best starting point probably is to have a look at resources online. So, for example, Young Minds, who are a UK charity that focus on mental health of children and young people, they provide lots of resources that are really helpful. And then there's loads of other organisations that can specialise in particular areas depending on the kind of nature of the difficulties. So, if it was something like bereavement or eating problems or self-harm, there are specialist organisations. So, you can just go online, and lots of them do provide online support and resources. But the other thing I would think about is, maybe it's also worth thinking about what might be holding you back from talking to somebody face to face, because some of those concerns might be unfounded. So often people really worry that if they talk to somebody, that person will tell other people. But normally, actually, what you talk to a professional about will be kept confidential unless they're worried about you or somebody else being at risk of harm. So sometimes it's useful to actually think about the things that are putting you off, and check out whether actually those may be true or not. Because if that's not the case, then sometimes that can help young people. And services are they're really keen to see you. So if there are things that they can do to try and make it easier for you, often they're very accommodating in that respect. So I think if you can sort of talk to them about some of the fears that you have, that can be really, really helpful.
Where can young people go to get support for their mental health if they don't have anyone to talk to?
I think it depends whether if you're in a kind of crisis, feeling really, really distressed situation. So if you are, then there's really good helplines where you can speak to somebody. So Childline or the Samaritans, are both great. They provide free support over the telephone, and there are other things like there's a helpline that you can text. So if you text shout to 85258, if you run up the middle of your keypad on your mobile phone and back down again, that's a really good text messenger support service for anyone where you can immediately access support. But I think if you're not feeling like you need to talk to someone in that exact moment, then often a good place to start, if you feel like you don't have sort of family or friends to talk to, would be about going to your teachers or seeing if you could talk to the school nurse or a GP or somebody else who is trained to be able to help you.
What can we do whilst waiting for an appointment to meet a mental health professional?
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? Because for many young people, there are long waits for treatment, and that means that you are often sort of having to manage on your own for a bit. And I think I would go back to the online resources that I mentioned. I think receiving support through sort of online services can be a really good way of sort of how managing in the meantime. There's other things like books on prescription. So there's some really good sort of books that are available that you can get free through your library. If you go through your sort of local library website. So there's a scheme called Reading Well, and they recommend sort of expert endorsed books for children, young people. So they can cover all sorts of things like anxiety, stress, OCD, or things like bullying. And so there are other resources out there. If you're not online, you could perhaps go and get a book, or use the helplines. So I think it's just about using those kind of things in order to try and manage while you're waiting for services.
What information do mental health professionals keep/store about a young person who seeks help for their mental health? Will this information be kept private?
Yeah, so mental health professionals do have a duty actually to keep information about you, but they also have a duty to keep it private, so to keep it confidential, unless you give permission, or to prevent harm, like I was mentioning earlier on, or for legal reasons. But they're duty bound to keep that information confidential. So it's really important actually that they do keep records for everybody that they're working with, so that they can deliver the best care, and also really importantly to keep them safe. But they must keep records secure, so that's really important. So typically that would be saved in your electronic health record that only authorized people can access, so other people can't log in and see that information. Or if they do keep paper records, they must be locked away in securely. That's absolutely crucial. And in fact, if a person they could even be in a position where they're no longer able to practice. So I think you can feel reassured that any information they have on you, that absolutely will be kept private, and they will be keeping that information confidential unless they have to, for whatever reason, break that confidentiality. But that would be very unusual.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Polly, for those great tips and ideas, which hopefully will help all our listeners and spread more awareness that it's okay to ask for help. Stay tuned for next week, guys, where we'll be asking Polly for top tips that we can all use when asking for help. So, guys, thank you for listening to our podcast, and thank you to Polly for coming along.
Thank you.